Crossing the Atlantic. When her mother slipped into a deep sleep one night and never awoke, Henrietta Marie knew that her life would never be the same. Her brothers, one by one, found jobs as sailors and disappeared. Her father had left on his ship. A boarding pass had been sent to Henrietta from America by Mrs. Louise Mabel, her mother's sister. A small bag was packed with Henrietta Marie's few belongings, and a neighbor took her to the ship that would transport her to a new world. A large sign with Henrietta's name in large letters was tied around her neck. The passage across the Atlantic was a strange time for Henrietta. She had wanted to leave England and understood that her dream had come true. But still numb from the loss of her mother, Henrietta never spoke a word throughout the long passage across the ocean. Mrs. Griffin, a robust woman with 3 daughters of her own, took it upon herself to watch over Henrietta, who slept in a bundle covered with a rough wool blanket amidst her girls. When they ate, she ate. When they looked out over the waters, Henrietta stepped out on deck. At night, Mrs. Griffin would sing to the 4 girls to calm their spirits. Henrietta listened with an expressionless face. When the singing stopped, she curled against the warmth of the young girls and drifted off to awaken the next day and follow the same routine. Henrietta felt as though none of this was real, and that she was walking, eating, and sleeping in an imaginary world. She neither cried nor laughed, and never thought about what her life would be like upon reaching the shore. The hurts and pains of her young life had built a thick wall of numbness that penetrated her being like a cold ocean breeze. When the ship docked in Henrietta's new homeland, Mrs. Griffin guided her through the rigors and humiliations of immigration procedures. The papers Mrs. Mabel had prepared for Henrietta's arrival seemed acceptable. Henrietta passed through without difficulty and left Mrs. Griffin's care when a tall young man with red hair led her from the throng of new immigrants to a carriage drawn by 2 of the most beautiful snow-white horses that she had ever seen. Although the young man chattered amiably in an attempt at conversation, Henrietta kept her vigil of silence. Finally he gave up and quietly drove the carriage until they reached a large gray house with white shutters and lavish lattice work. He stopped the carriage and helped Henrietta out. A short woman with silver hair, sky-blue eyes, and wearing a purple dress greeted Henrietta and led her up the steps of the house. Upon stepping inside, the first things Henrietta Marie noticed were the curtains, which were a rich magenta brocade, and the oriental rugs, which were woven with designs of beautiful rainbow-colored birds. She had never seen such color or splendor. The woman dressed in purple spoke in a soft, chirpy tone, asking Henrietta about her ocean passage and carriage ride. Henrietta could neither smile nor respond. She just looked upon her aunt with a numbed gaze and followed her to the dining room, where a fire burned brightly in the fireplace. A round woman with brown skin and brown eyes and wearing a yellow apron set a bowl filled with beef barley soup with sprigs of parsley floating on top on the table in front of Henrietta. She ate the soup and felt the warmth and nourishment fill her. A basket of biscuits served with a small bowl of currant jelly, finished off her meal. The two women watched as Henrietta devoured the entire basket of biscuits and emptied the bowl of jelly. The jelly was the best food Henrietta had ever eaten, sweet and tart at the same time, and a rich red color that brightened the biscuits and slid smoothly down her throat in a cloud of sweetness. Henrietta ate, never speaking, although the women kept encouraging her to talk. Finally, Henrietta went into a big kitchen where Gracie, the woman with the yellow apron, had drawn a tub of water. Gracie gave up on trying to get Henrietta to answer questions and let her soak in the warm water. Gracie hummed a hymn and went about her kitchen chores. After her bath, Henrietta was led up the stairs to her small room in a corner of the second floor, with green curtains and a bed of dark walnut. Both women came with her to the bedroom and covered her with a thick, multi-colored patchwork hat. The lady in purple laid her hand softly across Henrietta's forehead, and the brown lady touched her cheek ever so gently and muttered a prayer. Within minutes, Henrietta was asleep in the warmest, softest bed that she had ever felt. Aunt Louise wore purple every day and loved music and art. During the many years that Henrietta lived in her house, visitors arrived at unexpected hours. The extra room was quickly prepared and hot meals served for their guests. Some played the piano and sang. One carried a huge harp from which the most heavenly of melodies flowed. One man showed up in ragamuffin clothes and recited poetry until the wee hours of the morning. For 1 year, Henrietta remained silent. She ate and slept well and watched the goings-on in the unusual household. Her silence was respected. Though she was spoken to as if she would answer, there was no expectation of a response. Her silence was neither criticized nor discussed in her presence. Henrietta loved to sit in a corner of the kitchen and listen to Gracie sing as she cooked her large pots of delicious food. A change in Henrietta began when she started humming along. Hearing Henrietta's sweet voice, Gracie put down her wooden spoon and gave Henrietta a hug. From that time on, Henrietta's silence was over. Aunt Louise hired a tutor for Henrietta, and she learned to read the classics and studied Greek and Roman mythology. She was fascinated by her new knowledge and loved to recite the ancient poems aloud and to tell the stories she had read to her aunt. Aunt Louise listened intently, grateful that this little-known niece had emerged from her chrysalis to tell a tale. Perhaps someday, Louise Mabel hoped, Henrietta Marie would tell her own story. Henrietta's life began anew. She never heard from her father or brothers, yet sometimes a clear image of a white seagull flying over a wooden ship and the din of male voices mixed with the sounds of a bottle breaking against a ship and waves crashing against the shoreline would stir her memory. Suddenly, she would hear a bell ringing and see the words engraved on the bell. The Henrietta Marie. Why was her name on the bell of that ship? And where was the ship going? Someday she would like to know. the mystery of her memory.